I like this better because there's a bigger shaft, and bigger shaft means better suck, and better suck means better experience. That's just facts. So the plan today is pretty simple. We're gonna build a keyboard for Hipyo Tech, which I kind of forgot to do for the past year, but it's gonna be a special custom keyboard that wasn't originally custom. It's a DaVinci Resolve speed editor, has a big freaking knob for the fine-tune adjustments. But really, it's a pre-built, so how are we gonna make it custom? We're actually gonna make it hot swap. It's not a common thing to do, it's a little bit tricky, but I'm gonna show you step by step how to do it yourself. Let's get into it. So basically the stock switches are some form of red switch. I think it's a cherry or a Gateron, and they're fine. It's just not really fun. And Hipyo Tech likes messing around with different switches and mods. Let's go ahead and get into this. Typically in custom mechanical keyboards, you have solder PCBs or hot swap PCBs. Hot swap PCBs come installed with Kale or Gateron sockets, and those allow you to put in any switch, and it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky because the pins need to be straight. Other than that, it's pretty user friendly. And if you have a solder only PCB, you can solder in these little tubes that are called Millmax sockets. There's 0305, 3305, 7305. 0305 Millmax sockets are actually the tallest and cheapest. So they raise the switch and the keycap up a little bit. So it's not ideal, but it's very affordable. So the difference is going to be, if you look at switches, right? There's a nub right here. That nub is going to raise it up a little bit. The plastic is also raised up a little bit. If you're concerned about it raising it up too much, don't use a 0305. You want to use a 7305 or 3305. The 7305 was the thinner and shorter one, lower profile, harder to solder, but pretty decently expensive. Both of these options were not actually designed for keyboards, so the lifespan of them were pretty limited. I'll put the actuations on the screen. And now there's been a modern one designed for keyboards, 3305. Pretty dang expensive over the 7305, but it has the lifespan that you want for being able to put in switches and take them out over and over. It's just at that point, it costs the price of another PCB. Typically, in terms of pre-builds, we don't recommend desoldering them and making them hot swap. When I did commission builds more frequently, I did get that request often. They had like a cheap keyboard that they liked and they wanted me to rebuild it and make it custom. It's gonna cost more than the keyboard itself. It's just the fact of the matter. Like the parts, the time, the labor, it is what it is. In terms of soldering Millmax, it's a little tricky, but you got to get the Millmax socket in the PCB and hold it in place. Sometimes I use Kapton tape. It's a heat resistant tape so that when I flip it over to solder on the bottom, there's no issue with it falling out. Alternatively, you can actually put the sockets on switches and then put the switches in the PCB. The switch will hold in the PCB and then you can solder that way. But if you mess up, the socket is now permanently attached to your switch. Good luck. And in terms of soldering Millmax sockets, you typically want to do with a clean PCB. So brand new, there's no solder in there, there's no residue in there. Insert it in without any friction, tape it down, and you're good to go. So if hot swap is so easy to do and you can do it yourself, why doesn't everyone do it? Well, desoldering switches is much harder than soldering switches. I'm working on a solder guide and it'll be up in a few weeks, so subscribe if you want to see that. Soldering switches is not hard at all. You just got to make sure you don't forget your iron on the PCB. Desoldering, however, you need to use a separate tool and you got to really understand how solder flows and the molten core like liquefies. That requires a little bit more experience. Oh, that I'm not just happy to see you. That is a solder pullet.
That's a huge bitch.
It is a very affordable item. Big shaft, but it's not the tool for the job for factory soldered boards. We actually want an F301. If you don't know what an F301 is, maybe I'll use a language that you understand. Glarce's gun. We gotta use the Glarce's gun. All the links for the items that I'm using today are in the description box below underneath the like button. Check them out. F301 is by Hipyo. It's a really advanced tool that has a tube that heats up and then a vacuum that sucks in the middle so that you can get it all out in one go. It's a lot more expensive than the handheld pumps, but it's much more reliable and it's the best tool for the job. Because you don't have to do this transfer where you heat first and then you have to put the pump on top of the pad and then pull, it actually stays hot longer. The F301 can go to a pretty high temperature and then suck easily. And the difference between the solder pullet and the SSO2, the solder pullet here is a two-handed device. You gotta use the other hand to cock it. The SSO2, you can actually use your thumb to cock it. I've had a few people in my community mention the SSO2 jams pretty frequently, and the solder pullet never jams. Both of these have replaceable parts. You can replace this tip, which is the main thing. If the tip ever melts, you can just replace it and you're good to go. This is much easier to repair than an F301. An F301, every time something breaks, it's like 50 bucks. You can buy a whole nother one of these, or two, okay? And in terms of desoldering these pre-builds, these factories don't use the best solder. It actually takes a higher temperature to heat up, so most people have trouble using a cheap hand pump like the SSO2 or the solder pullet. You end up just messing up over and over. So you'll try to desolder one time, you suck, and then you have residue left over. The best way to finish this is to actually resolder the pad and then try again, because you want a big molten core of liquefied solder to suck out in one pull. If it's just little bits, it's less likely that the solder iron can actually heat up whatever's left over. So it's actually pretty tricky. And that's why whenever anyone asks, I recommend them just to buy another keyboard. It's just not worth the time to deal with these issues. But since Hipyo Tech is a friend and he requested this, I know I've done this before on a soldered PCB by another person, but not on a factory soldered board. So we're gonna find out today if this will work out. But let's get to work and see if we can actually desolder this thing. The keyboard is not cheap, it's about $400. So I don't want to mess up. All right, so this is the DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor. It is a macro pad with a big freaking knob. Of course, the knob needs its own hole because it's quite large. First things first, pop it open. Take a look right here. It torques and it torques. There we go. We got here a kale red. Has a diode, which is great, which is not great. These are all LED indicators, so I actually have to, that's gonna be a problem. So basically my concern is if we actually take out the LEDs here, none of the indicator LEDs work anymore, because although you can solder in a new switch and have LEDs soldered in, a little bit of a hassle, but it's doable. If you use Millmax, you will never have that because LEDs need to be soldered in and they go inside the switch, that little hole for the RGB. So yeah, I just gotta wait for him to respond. All right, Hipyo responded. He says, cool, let's lose the lights. An RGB lover like myself would never. There we go. We got some plate mounted stabilizers, which we will upgrade, no problem. I have some nice ones, they're fresh. Here's the rough part. I need to rip this off. Yeah, so basically I have to just rip it apart. I can try to wedge in there and I'll try my best, but the reality is this thing is just one piece of rubber and it's basically adhered. I have to lift it up with some kind of tool. What I'm actually gonna do is just try to heat it up and do that. So I'm gonna go off screen and hopefully it works. All right, so I'm back and probably should not have used a metal spudger tool because I did scratch this up a bit, as you can tell. A little scratchy, oops. But important thing is we did get all four sides lifted up without severely damaging the rubber. So we're not going to check in with Hipyo anymore because we're going to try not to tell him that it's been scuffed internally. It's fine. It's fine. We're professionals here, okay? Let's just move along. With those pieces off, I'm going to imagine the housing comes off. Oh yeah, baby. And my dog's going wild. The USB-C is kind of like in there. There we go. Just one JST cable. Let's just pull that bad boy out. Oh, there we go. Bottom housing with a rechargeable lithium-ion battery. The knob has its own JST connector. Ideally, I would just take this whole thing out, but do I have to? Probably should. But do I have to? I probably have to because there's no way to hold the sockets down. Roll out the solder mat. There you go. Boom. Like I said before, Millmax sockets are better when it's a fresh, clean hole. Sometimes PCBs have small, tight holes.
Excuse me, sir, I'm gonna need you to put your hands behind your back.
So basically, Millmax sockets are best to be used with fresh PCBs with no solder in it. Since we're actually desoldering a factory soldered PCB today, it's gonna be a rough time. Because there's residue when we desolder, it's actually gonna be very tight. And if we push too hard, we're gonna break the PCB. Those two smaller pins are the LEDs. That didn't work. So that's gonna be a situation to use wick. So after you desolder with a hand pump or F301, there may be leftover residue, and there's a way to remove it by using something called wick. It's essentially a heat-activated sponge in the shape of a rope. So you put the wick on top of the PCB, put the iron next to it. As the wick heats up, it'll kind of the solder into it. That way you can actually get the solder out without having to do the suction, because sometimes there's nothing to actually hold on to the pump. It's definitely not perfect, especially if you're using a hand pump. That's what you want to see. You can see that there's a black ring around the switch. Let's pull it over. Let's try to take it out. Bada bing, bada boom. We have desoldered the switch. This is only taking 3 pin switches, so it's a little bit unfortunate, but that's all we gotta do to desolder this entire thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and knock these out, and there we go. We actually did the first step. of getting this build done. For what we're doing today is using 7305 Millmax, which is the middle of the range, not the most modern Millmax socket, it's just the one most available to me. I'm going to use this, and it's a shorter tail, meaning once you go through the PCB, the other side where you actually solder is very short. So you can see it right here. This is not all the way in because we did desolder. There's a little bit of residue in there stopping it from going all the way through. We can wedge it a little bit. There you go. You see how the tail on the other end is very shallow. You don't want to flood and go inside the teeth of the socket, so you want to use thinner solder, be more careful. So because this has solder in the pad already, I can actually press down a little bit with the iron and push it through. And to start Millmax, you just go around it. What you want to do, take your thinner solder, right? And you're just going to heat the edge and touch it. You want the solder to distribute itself. You don't want to force it in. So let's show you how to insert the socket. You can use tweezers to help you because it is a little finicky. It sits on top like that. And go ahead and use that to stick it in, and it slid in relatively easily. Just push it all the way down and you go through like that. Because you don't want to watch this, I'm gonna go ahead and just fast forward through this. So are you like me and busy running around all day to figure out time to cook and prepare your meals? Dude, I woke up, took some calls, took care of the dogs, and next thing I know, it's almost lunchtime and I don't have anything prepared. Do I run out and get some food that's unhealthy and it's gonna cost a lot of money? No. Luckily, I got factory meals in the fridge to get me sorted. To make sure you don't miss out, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code ANDYV50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. There's more than 34 chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that have fancy ingredients like broccolini, asparagus, and truffle butter to really keep it interesting. And to round out your choices, you can get snacks and smoothies so you don't have to ever be tempted by that bag of chips or soda again. Factor comes in clutch because I can pop it in the microwave for 2 minutes and I get a nice, tasty, and healthy meal, so I don't have to worry about getting in my nutrients and preparing and cooking and cleaning and all that. Especially when you meal prep, you're often eating the same thing for multiple days at a time, and that gets a little boring. With Factor, I have multiple choices, so I can get 6, 8, 10 different meals per week, and that helps me from getting tempted to get takeout. If this sounds good to you, head to factor75.com or click the link in the description below. Use code ANDYV50 to get 50% off your first box. Let's get back to the video.
Striking. Larry, what the hell are you doing?
A Millmaxed PCB. Now I want to check that this works. So I had a little bit of a scare. I wasn't sure if it was working because I had connected it via USB. Nothing was registering, no keys whatsoever. But this is a Bluetooth keyboard. And after I connected via Bluetooth, yeah, everything works. It's tripping for nothing. Basically, that's it. The keyboard's assembled. I got to put the last screws in, but it works. It's wireless. It's able to be used to control DaVinci Resolve. Can edit very quickly with it. I kind of want to grab one for myself if I'm going to use Resolve. It's way faster than using a mouse and keyboard. Well, it's going to be a supplement to the mouse and keyboard. We learned how to Millmax today with a pre-built, and we survived, made it, and we just took our time and we're patient, and that allowed us to do a monumental task, which was to turn this into a custom keyboard. I think that's pretty cool. I'll leave you with a little sound test. So that's gonna be it. That was the build for Hipyo Tech. That's just phase 1. Phase 2 is probably gonna be him modding this keyboard to make it sound better with a new switch or whatever he does with his boards. He is a mad genius in terms of modding. And hopefully Hipyo enjoys his new keyboard and makes some more content for all of us. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.